welcome to episode 48 of Let's Talk Bitcoin for October 8th, 2013. Visit us at letstalkbitcoin.com for our daily guest blog, all our past episodes, and of course, tipping addresses. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today we're learning from folks who are fairly new but focused and passionate. Lauren is from Travel Pangea, a dedicated explorer and operator of one of the first travel agencies around to accept Bitcoin. He and Stephanie talk out how those with a travel bug can benefit from cryptocurrency, his experiences so far, and also monkeys. But first, Bitcoin is an outgrowth of the Cypherpunk movement. But what exactly does that mean? Richard Bowes has been writing about just that, and before we headed to Georgia, I caught up with him about the history of the Cypherpunk movement, what cryptocurrency means to it, and what can be learned from that history. We've got lots of conference interviews coming up, and Video Pass pre-orders are still available with an expected release date of late October 9th, 2013. Due to your support, we were able to upgrade our coverage to 2 angles and operators, which made for a bit more editing time. If you'd like to be the first to experience October 5th's cryptocurrency conference without actually visiting Georgia, visit bitcoinvideopass.com. For everyone else, all conference talks will be available for free 45 days after release. Thanks for supporting our experiment. We'll be offering more like it in the months to come. New though it may seem, Bitcoin is not the first private money whose native habitat is the internet. Furthermore, the patron saint of Bitcoin is not the first to see the need. Rather, Satoshi stood on the shoulders of those who came before, connected the right dots, and added his own innovation to create cryptocurrency as we know it today. But today is not our focus, and I'm joined by Richard Bowes, an entrepreneur and marketer who recently wrote about the history, what came before. Richard, thanks for joining me today on Let's Talk Bitcoin.
Hi Adam, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, in a nutshell, what is the cypherpunk movement?
That's a good question. I think it's easiest to start at the beginning. In 1992, when Tim May and Eric Hughes and John Gilmore started the Cypherpunks mailing list, a lot of people joined over the next kind of 5-6 years. And they were really interested in bringing strong encryption into the public domain and taking it away from agencies like the NSA out of the hands of government. So that's when it really gets going with a kind of label. But now I think with the rise of Bitcoin, it's becoming something else. You know, it's becoming almost a fashion statement. You know, it's becoming this kind of like place where that kids can identify with and understand, which coders and hackers and business people of all flavors can really come together. That's my take on it anyway. I see it as a movement, with Satoshi being the kind of mythical figurehead of the whole thing. But yeah, no, it has very deep roots. And clearly a lot of extremely intelligent people have put their weight into it in one way or another.
So when we talk about a mailing list, we're talking essentially about, and you said this was the late 80s?
Early 90s, really, 92.
Okay, so we're talking about very, very early email. And this is essentially not even so much a community as it was just people having a group conversation and mailing ideas back and forth on these topics, right?
Right, exactly.
So let me ask, how did you get interested in this topic? Was this, coming to it from the Bitcoin perspective and trying to figure out the history of where we came from, or were you interested in it from a different angle?
Let me say the first time I really heard of Bitcoin was July last year. And I'd kind of been thinking about digital money. My father's a programmer, and he had introduced me to the idea that the euro should have been a completely digital currency. And I sort of did some digging when I was a teenager and found out that all of the kind of political implications of having a digital currency that was like not anonymous, that was traceable. And so when I was introduced to Bitcoin, the penny dropped. And I think somebody introduced it to me quite simply as cryptographic, peer-to-peer, anonymous currency or something like that. And it just instantly took hold. And I was like, that's the next big thing. I'm going to go down this route absolutely, straight to it, and just dive straight into the rabbit hole. And the first thing that kind of grabbed me was, who is Satoshi, right? So I kind of Googled around and tried to dig a little bit and found that he had registered the site, I think it was, bitcoin.org, through anonymous speech, which was being run by a guy who was in one of the guest houses where I was living in Tokyo at the time. So I was kind of like, oh, Satoshi's more or less on my doorstep. Or when I was in Tokyo, he was more or less on my doorstep. I lived there for a couple of years in 2008. it kind of had this feeling that he was right there, that I'd been within spitting distance, even when I didn't really know anything about it. And obviously, those were very early days when nobody knew anything. So that kind of like, I don't know, something about that just really spurred me on. Then I had actually a lot of help with the research from a very good security consultant who kind of really dug into it. I emailed a few of the main guys, particularly Adam Back was extremely kind of helpful and open and friendly, and gave me some great leads to look at a bit deeper into who the major characters were. So it sort of came together organically.
So Richard, you mentioned strong cryptography as being sort of a cornerstone of what the cypherpunks were trying to do. Why is that something that was important to them at that point in time? Because I don't really think there was the threat of the NSA breaking all communications pervasively. I think early on, in the 70s, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman, right? They came up with this algorithm, which was known as RSA. Stephen Levy describes this whole story in much detail in his book Crypto. And these guys and Marty Hellman and Diffie Whitfield, particularly Diffie Whitfield, actually had this kind of real, almost paranoid mistrust of specifically the NSA and specifically government agencies who were insisting that strong cryptography was not something for the masses, that it was a threat to national security. And particularly when Marty Hellman and Whitfield Diffie came up with their key exchange, the NSA was terrified and kind of, put a clamp on the whole thing. Key exchanges it was just a new thing in cryptography, right? Public-private key exchanges. Before that, you only had symmetrical encryption, where you both had to have the same passwords to access an encrypted message. Whereas with the Diffie-Hellman system, you created your public key and your private key, and you published your public key, and then you could swap your public keys, and you could send your encrypted messages to whomever you had the public key of. And so the NSA kind of freaked out over this because it had been worked out in deepest, darkest secret I think in the bowels of GCHQ in the 60s. But GCHQ hadn't figured out how to use it, and they obviously hadn't published it. I know NSA, but what's GCHQ?
GCHQ is the British version of NSA. I think it stands for General Central Communications Headquarters or something like that. But GCHQ is the British version of the NSA. So yeah, and there was this kind of moment where the state certainly classed strong encryption algorithms as weapons. And so you couldn't export the strong encryption algorithms in your software. And I think Lotus had something called Notes that was the NSA basically clamped down and said, you can only have 31-bit encryption on the foreign export version of Notes and things like that.
So do you think that the cypherpunk movement was a reaction to that, or was the cypherpunk movement already in process when this started becoming an issue?
What's interesting is these guys really saw it coming. They really saw the whole, even people like Assange, really early on thinking all of these communications are going to get sucked up as they pass from continent to continent by the governments, and nothing is going to be private. It's all just public stuff. So it's not even a question of if they do it. It's basically when. It's like this. All of this communication is public, and therefore strong cryptography should be in the public domain also. People have a right to privacy, and they really saw that coming 10, 20 years ahead.
So seeing things coming early isn't always that rewarding of an experience. And I know that there have been other attempts at things like cryptocurrencies that were not exactly cryptocurrencies before this. Those arose from the cypherpunk movement as well, right?
I think what maybe differentiates cypherpunk as a movement from those other early experiments, or particularly systems like the Liberty Reserve, are the philosophy and the politics behind it, right? So in my mind, at least, as I say, cypherpunk is kind of by nature, its goal is to overturn the status quo. By nature, it's disruptive. But also, I think there is this kind of strong philosophical, perhaps even moral backbone to it, which, I have to say, things like Liberty Reserve, I'm not so sure that they're backed up in the same way. Or even David Chaum, who was a brilliant cryptographer and the creator of DigiCash, he had the sort of the privatization profit motive going on behind DigiCash, which I think ultimately sank it. And what's key about Bitcoin and the new technology is the fact that it's so shared, so it's so open source that anybody can get involved. And that's why you have acolytes and evangelists who are just crazy about it, almost religious in their fervor, because it has this potential to just kind of open up the economic stage and allow people in. And it's not exclusive in the way that DigiCash was. So I know that you're pretty much a believer too, and most people that are listening to the show will be as well. But I think that's the main differentiation between Bitcoin and its public ledger and its open source nature and the previous attempts.
So what do you think, for people lacking an understanding of where we've come from, what parts about the cypherpunk movement or specific individuals within it? You mentioned Assange, and I assume you mean Julian Assange. He has an interesting quote, transparency for the powerful and privacy for the weak. And I think that that's a really interesting approach, because we live in a world that's full of one-size-fits-all solutions, and generally speaking, it's kind of why we have this problem that we do now, because if there are a small number of bad actors, then everyone is treated as if they might be a bad actor, which makes it harder, which makes things in general harder for everybody. So we don't have some things that we would, except for this sort of fear. What parts about the cypherpunk movement or individuals within it do you think is important for people to understand who aren't familiar with this, who have never heard of it before?
I suppose the main thing is this idea that if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to lose. I mean, that is the oldest argument in the book, right? And if you've ever read like Kafka, it just doesn't work like that. That if you've got bad actors in government, you can be as good as anybody, and they'll still persecute you. So this idea that if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to lose is it's true up to a point, right? But most people are suspicious of Bitcoin because it protects your privacy, or in some ways it protects your privacy, right? People who don't know about cypherpunk are quite likely to kind of say, oh, well, these guys are just disruptive, and they want anarchy, and they want terrorists to be able to communicate, and But I think really that's not the case. I think the case is we need to find alternatives to this surveillance state, to the kind of the control that these unknown forces wield over us, right? Like, I mean, we're creative people, and I think we have a right to be creative. And so that's kind of the main thing that needs to come out of this, is this idea that privacy is a privilege, when in fact, really it's a right. You and I should be able to communicate, really whatever we like without being spied on. So that's the key message.
In our society, it definitely seems like there are people who believe that, but as you mentioned, it's really more about the people in government and what they believe. One of the not so nice terms that are used to sometimes describe the cypherpunks is crypto-anarchists. And I'm wondering what you think of that term as it relates to this group.
Well, I think it's kind of fair, but on the other hand, I'm going to hark back to this old thing of the founding fathers being thought of as terrorists at the time of the establishment of the United States. I mean, I think you've got this group of people who, actually quite a large group of people who are founding fathers of the internet, and the same goes for the cypherpunks. I mean, there are, as you say in your introduction, Satoshi was standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, people who really had far-reaching ideas, and who, in some senses, I think, are anarchists.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that term, anarchists, because anarchists is one of those words that, in modern parlance, has sort of different associations than I think that people who proudly refer. There are some people who proudly refer to themselves as crypto anarchists. I don't really feel like their interpretation of that word is that there's someone going around lobbing digital bombs, as might be the assumption based on how they're treated in the media sometimes. What defines a crypto anarchist in this context?
I couldn't tell you whether the cypherpunks are crypto-anarchists, whether they want to lob digital bombs or anything like that. As I say, I guess each member has their own philosophy. I also think that gentleness and compassion and mindfulness is the way forward in creating a global culture, right? So we are on the verge of having this incredibly powerful technology. And I've heard a lot of people, adopters of Bitcoin, talk about, it's not cool to be a billionaire anymore, right? Now it's cool to be a trillionaire kind of thing. And that may be so, but what we really need to do is kind of figure out ways that we can make a better world, right? Because we've got this incredible mechanism for energy exchange with very, very low transaction fees. So we can send great amounts of energy. And as Vitalik Buterin says in his recent article in Bitcoin Magazine, the main thing to do is figure out ways of distributing tasks, doing distributed computing, and not necessarily in the way of SETI or folding at home, but in the way, in Bitcoin's own particular way. It will give rise to new social architectures and hopefully new medical advances and things like that. But I think we really have to think carefully about how we want to use this power. It's the old Spider-Man thing of with great power comes great responsibility. We need to embrace that. That's my 2 cents anyway. And I would actually, having had some connection with what I would term real crypto anarchists, and having seen the kind of raw disregard for law or raw desire to tear down the old institutions, I kind of, I'm more moderate than that. I'm happy to see banks disintermediated to a certain extent, and credit card companies, to take some of their power away from them and downsize them. But I'm not personally in favor of just tearing down the old society, willy-nilly, without care. I think we do need to really apply ourselves to how to recreate the economy and how to get people standards of living up, and to look at, the developing countries and see how we can apply Bitcoin there. So there's so much work to be done, actually. I think crypto anarchy is a little bit of a distraction. But
okay, I can see that. So is it an inherent dislike of rules, or is it a dislike of the current system that you think leads people who are thinking like you were just describing to not be interested in the current system? Is it any system? Is just that there is a system that's a problem, or is it just that they don't like the current system and so they don't respect it?
I don't know. I think there's probably a difference between punks and anarchists, in the sense that punks are kind of just a bit naughty and anarchists are quite serious, about tearing down the system. Now, there may be a spectrum, right? And sometimes they might get a little bit too rowdy, too serious. I wouldn't want to judge either way. If people are really, really being given a hard time by the system, and they need to take their anger out on the system, and they want to destroy it, and they want to use Bitcoin to do it, well, that's just a fact of life. That's going to be a reality, right? I think the problem with the system at the moment, really, and I don't want to be too general, but there's a lot of friction in the global economic system, right? And there's a huge imbalance. So we really need to kind of focus on taking the friction out of the legacy system and using Bitcoin almost as a lubricant, right? Kind of digital snake oil, if you like, but digital lubricant to get the economy going again, and also to redistribute so that people can work at home in a way that makes sense for them, so that you can outsource easily to digital tasks to people the other side of the world, or you can get paid for your work in an increasingly multinational, multilingual environment without too much hassle, without giving too much money to the credit card companies, right? So, all the banks.
Richard, is there anything that I haven't asked about that you'd like to go over?
A lot of the technical stuff in my article is fascinating, and it runs very deep. And I kind of feel like I've only just got the outline of how deep it really goes. One of the most interesting things for me is, I suppose, this thing that Satoshi said before he disappeared, which was, let's not focus too much on the mysterious creator thing. And I think that's right in a sense. I'm also very interested in the idea that Bitcoin is a kind of intelligence all of its own, a sort of disembodied corporation, if you like. I know that doesn't actually make sense, but a disembodied intelligence maybe. In terms of the technical stuff, that's really where it's at, really looking into how it can be applied. Another thing I would just say is, if you're really interested in digital property rights and stuff like that, read Nick Szabo's stuff, because he is fantastic. I mean, he's just so interesting and so deep and so academic. And as I say in the article, he was sort of in the habit of going through what what technology there was, and kind of contextualizing it in historical terms. And so I think he's a great introduction to the subject, and hopefully also kind of a bit of a visionary about where it should go, or where the technology is going. But also, I mean, there have been so many great technical innovations, real hardcore coders going into it. Where do you start?
Well, the place to start in this case is letstalkbitcoin.com/punk if you want to be directed to Richard's article. And Richard, thanks for joining us to talk about the Cypherpunk movement. We look forward to having you back on the show soon.
Great. Thanks very much, Adam. Thanks for having me.
EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB. If I showed you a website where you could easily purchase electronics from the world's largest distributor with Bitcoins at 0% markup, would you think it was too good to be true? Good news. It's real, and it's at bitcoinstore.com. Choose from 500,000 items, save money over Amazon and Newegg, and convert your Bitcoins to real-world items. You can even buy with privacy. All they need is a shipping address. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself at bitcoinstore.com. I'm here talking with Lauren Infeld. Lauren is from Travel Pangea. And Lauren, thank you for being on Let's Talk Bitcoin today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Travel Pangea is a travel agency, but it's a little bit different than other travel agencies because you all accept Bitcoin. Is that right?
That is true. Yeah.
So I want to know about what that's like. But first of all, how did you find out about Bitcoin, and how did you get to the point where Travel Pangea was working with Bitcoin?
Well, we run in fairly tech-savvy circles, and so we'd heard Bitcoin being tossed around since its inception. My partner at the agency had talked to people right as Bitcoin was getting going, and we had kind of talked about it as a concept, and then started hearing from more and more people that thought it'd be pretty interesting if they could book travel using all this Bitcoin that they had earned or saved up. And so we spent a while researching and deciding, and we chose to give it a go.
Yeah. So are most of your clients individuals, or are they, companies that are doing corporate kinds of travel?
We don't do that much corporate. We do individuals, groups. We do a bit of everything. Probably our Bitcoin clients have been mostly individuals and individual people within groups that are booking and traveling.
Okay, so that's interesting. So there aren't too many companies yet that are doing a lot of their expenses in Bitcoin to the point where they're paying for travel with Bitcoin.
Not yet, although that would be a really cool development, a nice way to work with companies doing direct Bitcoin transfers.
Yeah, I imagine, we've heard from a lot of companies that they do have some trouble because the software isn't really there yet for doing serious kinds of accounting with Bitcoin. So they do have some issues with that, I think. But what is your typical client like? Do you have a stereotypical kind of client? Is it somebody who works for themselves and jets around the world, a Bitcoin millionaire? Tell me about that.
It is always fun working with someone who's got a ton of money or Bitcoin to go do whatever they want because you can book the best adventures. But I think our clients are pretty well varied. But like I said, we have been around the kind of tech-savvy, young internet or technologically sound people who are doing modern work and cutting-edge stuff, and the sort of people who were turned on to Bitcoin early on and were able to take advantage of it. So usually fairly young, adventurous sort of travelers doing all sorts of interesting trips. And we specialize in unusual, odd, or complex itineraries. And So it's always fun to work with these people who have a bit of coin and want to use it to see the world.
Okay, and so are people mostly doing this for personal trips, or is it like business trips, or maybe mixed?
Mostly personal travel that we've done so far anyway. I could definitely imagine people moving over to business travel this way, though.
So when you make the arrangements, like, first of all, tell me a little bit about what a travel agent does.
Well, yeah, it's kind of funny because I have that conversation a lot with people saying, well, can't we just book online? It's true that not as many people need to come to you for a quick, easy flight to somewhere. But what a travel agent does is really go above and beyond that and help you figure out and shape a vacation to create the perfect experience. So when you're saying, I'd kind of like to go to Asia, rather than just get online and see what you can find and book it, you can talk to me. I've been to Asia many, many times and booked hundreds of people and know the ins and outs, and I can sit with you and figure out, or talk with you online or like we're doing now, and figure out exactly what it is that you're interested in. Do you want to see temples, or do you want to see monkeys, or do you want to see the best nightclubs in Thailand or something?
I want to see monkeys, Lauren.
Come to the right place. I actually am infamous for my love of monkeys, and my best party trick is I can say monkey in over 50 languages. But I've been attacked by monkeys in a few countries and enjoyed it thoroughly, actually.
Okay, so you're more like a consultant for travel.
Yeah, so essentially not just, get you on a plane from A to B, but help you figure out what you want to do, what works for you, and kind of get you inspired to, instead of just get on a plane and go take some pictures of some famous buildings or something, to really get into what you would enjoy most. To go out to, the monkey forests in Bali then, for example, or my favorite is the Batu Caves in Malaysia, where you climb up a bunch of steps while you watch monkeys running up and down them in, 7 seconds, while it takes you, half an hour to climb up all these steps. But, to find the experience that will make your trip the best trip for you.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And I've heard before that, being a travel agent, I guess, can be like a really rewarding kind of career. It's pretty flexible. You can kind of do it from anywhere. Are you how did you get into the business? Yeah,
it is really rewarding. It's also been, it's appeared on some lists of the most stressful jobs. I always explain that, if you're a grocery bagger and you accidentally drop someone's milk, it's not too big a deal. But if you're a travel agent and you get someone on the wrong flight, or someone misses their flight, or, you get the panicked phone calls and people crying and trying to figure out what to do of, I missed my flight, I'm stranded, help. And so it can be stressful, but it's also really rewarding, especially to do the complicated trips where it's someone's pipe dream. They came to you and said, I've always dreamed of seeing Europe, but I just don't know how to do it. And by the time you finish, they're going out and seeing everything they've always dreamed of, and that feels pretty cool. And I got into it exactly for that reason. I love travel. I've traveled all my life. And I realized people were asking me for advice when they took trips. And so I started out working at a university at a travel agency, just because when I was at university, I studied abroad. It absolutely changed how I looked at the world, how I looked at myself and my place in it. And it really profoundly affected me. And I really wanted to help young people do that, to feel the same way and to grow in that way. It's kind of maturing accelerated to learn so much about yourself when all of your surroundings are taken out and you're put into a totally foreign situation. And so that's how I got into it, and did it for years doing that, and then moved on and started my own. And to become more flexible, just like you were saying, technically I could be anywhere in the world and still help you with your travel, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And so since this is your business, you can decide, okay, we would like to take Bitcoin. And so when did you start taking Bitcoin? First of all, I want to hear when.
Fairly recently. It's been within the past few months. It was a long debate for a few months before that. And
who are you debating with?
Well, it was me and my partner who handles kind of the business side. I get to do the fun stuff and send people around the world and I've got someone to handle the business paperwork stuff that is not nearly as fun as sending people on adventures. The two of us make the main decisions, and we were just really kind of trying to learn as much as we could about Bitcoin and not dive in blind. And we had a lot of concerns about the volatility and things like that. And obviously a new currency with such a fairly unregulated concept seemed pretty scary, and so it took us a while to decide to take the leap and then actually start initiating and take some payments and learn how it all worked. And fortunately we had a lot of very friendly travelers that were able to go easy on us for our first Bitcoin experiences.
Right. And so about what was the time frame for that?
Probably about 3 months ago or so is when we did the first payment.
Oh, okay. So fairly recently.
Yeah, we're newbies to it still, and so we're not super pros, but it's been really a good experience so far.
And so in the last 3 months, about how many clients have you had who wanted to use Bitcoin to do their travel arrangements?
It's not the majority of our business yet. We're actually just starting to market to the idea of looking for clients, specifically Bitcoin clients. Mm-hmm. So we've had probably half dozen or so, not a huge amount, but we definitely see the potential. I've had many conversations with people who, when they found out we were accepting Bitcoin, they got excited and started thinking about future plans.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, in 3 months, if you have a half dozen clients, that's one every couple weeks. So that's not too bad.
Yeah. And we hope to, expand out. And I think it's a kind of a unique way. And the development of Bitcoin and the people who got in early on managed to kind of get a decent stash, for some of them at least, of some coin. And it seems like it's a neat idea to take this, kind of a digital virtual currency and spend it on something that's more what people dream on, rather than, say, paying your rent or doing something more practical with it. To take it and have some fun with this currency.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly show include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.
Of course, everyone's free to spend their money and their Bitcoins however they think is best, but I think travel could be totally practical. I mean, if it changes your life.
That's not to say that travel is impractical, but I used to joke that, back in the day, I would spend my rent money on plane tickets so often.
Well, you wouldn't have to pay your rent if you weren't living there for that month, right?
Yeah, well, I've sat outside of many airports staring before my flight home thinking, now what would happen if I just didn't come, if I just kept traveling? But I found, the practical stuff I'd always find some way to pay for, so I made sure to buy my plane tickets to book my dreams so that I couldn't talk myself out of it. And I've never regretted a single trip I've done. I've been all over the world, and I've helped tons of people do it, and I'd be hard-pressed to come up with examples of people going, well, I would have much rather had that $1,000 back than have gone and had this experience. It just doesn't happen. It's a really enriching thing to do. That
I would have rather paid my taxes with that $1,000. No, wait a minute.
Not that people shouldn't be financially responsible, but if there's any way to squeeze out, a little bit of money to go play, I think that traveling is a way better thing to invest in than, fancy clothes or new rims for your car or something like that,
Right, yeah. So I'm curious about how the business side works for you, at your business. Do you accept Bitcoin from your clients, and then what do you do? Do you hold on to the Bitcoin and then make the arrangements in dollars? Do you immediately change the Bitcoin into dollars and then use that for the business expenses, or do you do some kind of split between those two?
Well, being kind of new and just getting going, there's definitely not too many vendors, hotels, airlines, anything around the world that's accepting Bitcoin. So we generally have to, at some point, convert it into dollars in order to pay off the vendors for the bookings we do. So far, we've been accepting it in Bitcoin and converting it fairly quickly into dollars, and then moving it into accounts to pay off vendors. although we have talked about in the future as we grow the business, and especially if we are ending up doing more and more Bitcoin transactions, then creating kind of a buffer where we can sit on Bitcoin for a while and watch the market and see how it goes, and possibly even increase our earnings that way, which would be just an extra bonus perk on top of the business.
Right, yeah. And do you advise people about, I'm picturing, if somebody's going on a trip to Berlin, let's say, and they know that there's bars and restaurants and maybe even places to stay that accept Bitcoin in the neighborhood where they're going, like potentially that could save them a lot on like foreign credit card fees and like traveler's checks and all that crap that people usually have to do when they go to another country. Like, have you had anybody who's kind of asked you about that, or has Bitcoin been able to solve some of those problems?
Not yet, but that's actually where I do see a major potential, because just as a merchant, as someone selling travel to you, then there's fees associated with that. And, we're always looking at ways to be putting the money towards trips and not towards, paying off Visa or MasterCard or somebody their cut of the charge. And so the fact that Bitcoin does have opportunities to do it at very low percentages of fees, and it's an easy way to move money around without losing a lot of it to fees, I think that there's really good potential there. And I would like to look into places, especially hotels and other travel-related activities that do deal in Bitcoin. And I would love to partner up with people and kind of have an alliance, maybe start building the reputation and the acceptance in the travel industry of Bitcoin.
Right. The thing that I immediately think of is Airbnb. And I don't know, you're probably familiar with Airbnb, but just for our listeners who may not be, it's a service that allows people to hook up. It allows people who want to maybe rent out a house or a place to stay on a short-term basis, or maybe they're still living there and they want to rent out a room or something. It hooks them up with people who want to rent that place to stay. And so it really expands the possibilities. People can find places to stay that may be significantly cheaper than local hotels and stuff like that. And Airbnb, as I understand it, was actually founded by Brian Armstrong, who is now at Coinbase. I think there could be like a real partnership potentially between Airbnb and accepting Bitcoin, and the potential is there for people to be able to basically buy a hotel or a place to stay with Bitcoin anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I think that it's an emerging technology, just like a few years ago, the concept of booking all your travel through the internet, or even using the internet as you travel, was a crazy idea. And now you couldn't imagine not doing it. I keep, 5 different apps on my phone that as I travel, whenever I get Wi-Fi, update local currencies and check in itineraries and look at the plans. There's always the curve of waiting for humans to wise up to the emerging technologies, basically. I wish I was a big enough company to be the company that leads that charge, but I think that a lot of little places, individual hotels, small agencies like me will be moving that way and accepting Bitcoin, and then it will gain momentum, and then somebody big like Airbnb or someone, a large hotel chain or a tour company or an airline will decide to hop on the not as cutting edge as it was a few years ago, but still pretty hot sort of technology, and then it'll move out and it'll become this radical new thing for the mainstream that hopefully those of us in the know have been using for a while, and the rest of the world is discovering that there's this other way that you can pay for things universally and not deal with, like you were saying, foreign transaction fees can be real surprise killers for people when they get back from their trip and check their credit card statements.
Yeah, actually, let's talk about that for a minute. Let's do a hypothetical scenario here and say I live in New Hampshire and I want to go on a trip to China and see the monkeys, let's say, and and I'm going to go for 2 weeks, and I'm going to use my credit card to pay for as much as I can, but maybe I'll get some of the local currency and change some money while I'm there. How much do you think I could expect maybe to spend in transaction fees? Like, what percentage of my total cost from the trip might be in those foreign transaction fees and, changing money and all that kind of stuff. The costs basically that Bitcoin could eliminate.
Essentially, there's different ways to access your money and spend your money. And it's actually something that I point out to my travelers fairly frequently, is to make sure you talk to your bank and try to minimize the amount you pay, because some banks charge for ATM withdrawals, some charge for using it as a credit card, some charge for both, some charge flat rates, some charge percentages. And then, of course, if you just bring a wad of cash, first of all, I never advise that, because walking around with a wad of cash does not make you feel very comfortable. But on top of that, you're going to pay transaction fees or commissions. And then if not that, then they give you a worse exchange rate, so you're not getting dollar to yuan in your example. So there's usually, most cards charge around 3% extra for fees, some credit cards as high as 10%. So I've had emergencies where I lost a card and I had to use a credit card and got home to a 10% fee on every charge I made.
Oof.
So it can really add up. Say you go stay for 2 weeks in a $100 a night hotel and then try to put it all on a card at the end and get caught with that 10% fee. That's what, $140 for that example. Yeah, as you go through and you're doing day tours and visiting attractions and eating and buying souvenirs, and we spend our money everywhere as we travel and as we do in daily life. And so abroad, you can see a lot of fees add up. And I think that if we are at a point where you could use Bitcoin more often, you would definitely be shaving those fees way, way down.
Do you help people with like visa issues too? Are you doing that?
Generally, it's a bad idea to make promises as a visa expert. As a travel agent, I do help advise, but I always advise double checking with the government. Travel.state.gov is the best place to find out. I've had a lot of experience with visas all over the world, so I can usually answer general questions, but I do always advise people to double check just to make sure those laws change. I've been in situations where the month before I was going to a country, they did not require a visa in advance, and at the point that I was going, they did require it, and I had to scramble and get myself a visa last minute, and it wasn't fun. And so I can help, but I can't guarantee. So I always refer people to the authorities on that as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture if there's any way that Bitcoin could help with that, but I'm kind of at a loss. Like
that would be challenging, because that would be going directly through the governments of the world.
Right. They're going to be the last people to embrace innovation.
Bitcoin is the big renegade on that. We're saying we don't need the government to regulate our currencies. We'll just do it ourselves. So it might be hard to go back to the government and say, now that we've done it ourselves, how about you guys work with us on that?
Right.
Yeah, it might be a little challenge for that. But visa costs usually are a pretty small percentage of your total travel costs.
Gotcha. Unless you're talking about Visa, the credit card company.
Yeah, the credit card company, that can be a pretty large portion of it.
Okay, Lauren, is there anything else you want to add? I mean, this has been really interesting for me, but maybe one last question. When do you see like maybe airlines or hotels like coming online with Bitcoin? What would you predict might be like the time frame for that?
I'd put hotels before airlines. Airlines are not the quickest to adopt trends, and they're also behemoth things that have their own set of magical logic to them.
The word dinosaur came to mind for me.
Yeah, really. Well, I've had to explain to people that you can't really predict. Sometimes, a good example is I'm in Sacramento right now, and a flight from Sacramento to, say, New York via Atlanta might be $400. But if I just wanted to fly that leg to Atlanta, it might be $900. They have their own sort of logic and reasoning, and they do a lot of algorithms and calculations to try to find out what's the best. But they are kind of a dinosaur thing until we figure out a way to flap our own arms and get ourselves there, though. They're what we've got. So I think that what will happen is some of the low-cost carriers, some of the new innovators, people like maybe in Europe, say EasyJet or Ryanair, those sort of people that are doing very low-cost flights, and they're the ones that are eking their way into an established business and pushing the limits. I would love to see AirAsia personally in Asia. They're one of the best they're probably the best low-cost airline in the world. And those are the people that they make their money by finding ways to lower their expenses. They're the ones that introduced, Ryanair is infamous for their nickel and diming policies, but they're the ones that introduce things like kiosks instead of agents at airports, because then you pay less people and cut down your costs. Websites instead of call centers. So doing Bitcoin transactions rather than paying, Visa or MasterCard those fees is another logical way where they can trim down. They land at alternate airports that charge lower taxes. So they're the ones that are looking for ways to keep their costs down, because their bread and butter is undercutting the major airlines. So I think they're going to be the ones that will eventually adopt. I would think it's probably not in the next year or two, but hopefully soon thereafter. And in the hotel world, I think that it'll be individual hotels popping up everywhere accepting it, and then some of the smaller chains following suit, and then the big guys waking up and saying, oh, hey, look, there's all this, that there's about 1,200 hotels in London. So not all of them are chains. And when the big chains look around and realize that there's 500 hotels in town that are now accepting Bitcoin, then they'll realize that maybe they need to get on board to stay competitive as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It sounds like there's really an opportunity for some innovation in these industries that are not, especially the airline industry, that's not traditionally associated with being very innovative, at least in the last few decades.
I think that it's evolved that, 50 years ago, companies could do well by just plodding along and being really good at what they do and working hard. And now innovation is the key to everything. That every company that's doing really well now is because they came up with a really unique idea or a really unique design. And like I said, until we can flap our wings and fly ourselves, then we're going to need the airlines. But I think that we would be drawn as people and as travelers to the ones that are innovating, and I think that Bitcoin is a really solid innovation for them to lean towards.
Yeah. Okay. And one last question. If you had a client who wanted to take a Bitcoin vacation, and not just to pay for it in Bitcoin, but like they wanted to go and see the places in the world where there are like Bitcoin intentional communities and they can buy things with Bitcoin, where would you recommend that they go?
Boy, that is a fantastic question that I wish I had a really good answer for. I honestly don't know. That would be something I would do a lot of research for, and I bet you might actually be able to answer that better than me, really, with your better knowledge of the Bitcoin culture. But it's something I'd be interested in finding out. I did see about the people, was it they were trying to do a honeymoon or just a vacation using only Bitcoin?
Oh, there was a couple who wanted to live the first 3 months of their marriage on only Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But they were in their hometown in Utah or something like that.
Oh, I thought I read about somebody who was trying to do a vacation that way too, and
there could be, and I just don't know about it.
Yeah, and so I think that as our Bitcoin sales pick up and as we get the word out about it, I definitely will be researching that and looking for opportunities. And like I said, I'd love to partner with, as a small business ourselves, I always like to try to give business to small local companies operating all over the world as long as I've proven their reliability. And so if I can find individual hotels or tour companies or other travel-related companies that are accepting Bitcoin, I would definitely, look to give them business and spread the Bitcoin love and get more people traveling Bitcoin style and thinking about the possibility of doing that.
Cool. All right, Lauren. So where can people find you online, and if they want to, use your services to book a Bitcoin vacation, where can they go to do that?
Well, we're on most social media. We have travelpangea.com. It's Pangea, not GAEA. We didn't do the official spelling. We went for something a little easier for people to spell, I guess. But we're on Facebook and Twitter and all that as well. info@travelpangea.com is the email that'll get you the fastest response. And yeah, I guess those are the main ways to find us. And we'll be expanding out our website to have Bitcoin payments where you can go and pay directly on the site via Bitcoin. And
so right now, if they want to use Bitcoin to pay for it, they have to make arrangements with you kind of by email. Is that how it works?
Well, what we've been doing is talking with individual clients, and once we have a plan, because there hasn't really been a need so far of a flat rate or a flat product to purchase, since we're not like say a clothing store where you can buy this T-shirt for $20 and you can just submit a $20 Bitcoin. We'll have been in communication. We'll have been talking. We'll have planned your trip and figured out your plans, and then when it comes time to actually purchase everything, and then we've got your itinerary. It's all set. Here's what we're going to do. Stay in this place, take this flight, do this tour. Then we know the total, and then we just have been invoicing Bitcoin invoices where then people can pay via Bitcoin once we have the exact amount nailed down. As we do more trips and when we do groups and things like that, where say 30, 40 people are doing the same trip, then it's a set price, and then we can have you go directly to the site and make a payment, purchase this product at this price. The travel business it's rare to have this product at this price since we're planning a whole vacation.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but we have been. It's something actually that we've thought about, is the ways to put it online so that we don't have to invoice every individual person, but to make it flexible enough that people can go in and make a Bitcoin payment, but also make it for the right amount. We don't want people sending us Bitcoin that isn't the correct amount for their vacation, or paying too little or too much and having to do partial refunding and things. And so it's something we've been considering, the best way to make it as convenient as possible for the clients without creating possible problems and areas for things to go wrong.
Gotcha. All right, Lauren Infeld from Travel Pangea, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate your time. This was a great interview.
No problem. Thank you. I'm glad I could chat with you.
Thanks for listening to episode 48 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's show was provided by Stephanie Murphy, Lauren Infield, and Richard Boaz. Music was provided by Jared Rubens. If you can't get enough original thought and discussion, read our daily blog at letstalkbitcoin.com. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at theweeklybitcoin.com. To get in touch, send me mail at adam@letstalkbitcoin.com or visit letstalkbitcoin.com/talk to be directed to our listener subreddit. See you next time.